Hi everyone, I'm Monique with Open Gate Quilts, and today I'm going to give you some ideas on how to make a successful quilt and the tools that you're going to need. I always have my 6 or 6.5 by 24 inch ruler and my 6 by 12 inch ruler, and I also have my fit to be quarter 6.5 ruler. Why I like this is it's wonderful for squaring, and as I get into doing more of my piecing, this is going to be perfect for that. So that's the rulers that I need. So I'm just going to put those aside. And the other thing that you absolutely need is your rotary cutter. With your rotary cutters, what I like to do, especially when I'm starting a new project that has a lot of cutting in it, is I make sure that my blade is new and sharp. That way, as I'm going along, I'm not struggling with cutting and everything cuts really nicely. So make sure that you have a nice sharp rotary cutter, as well as make sure you have, of course, your mat ready to go, because you want to make sure that you have everything ready when you start. So I'm going to go a little bit over cutting because I want to make sure that you guys are prepared for starting a new project. I'm going to show you how to cut fat quarters, plus I'm going to show you how to cut just regular yardages. There's a couple different ways of cutting, and like I said, I always make sure that everything is pre-ironed so that I can go ahead and start cutting right away. With a fat quarter, the fat quarter, I'm going to put my glasses on so I can see here. A fat quarter is 20 to 22 inches, depending on the manufacturer, by 18 inches wide. So this is the size of a fat quarter. Reason I like fat quarters so much is because you get quite a bit of yardage and it's nice and wide. So if you have to cut a 12.5 inch square, you have plenty to be able to cut this. When I cut fat quarters, I will fold it so that I have my raw edge along my selvage. So I do cut two thicknesses, and I'm going to use my smaller ruler because it will fit across, and I'm going to use one of my lines on my ruler. In this case, I'm just going to use the 1/2 inch line, and I'm going to trim up that little bit extra there, that raw edge. Now if you're left-handed, you're going to do it the opposite way. You're going to line this up, line up again your ruler along the bottom, and trim it. So I'm not left-handed, so I'm not going to even attempt it. So once I have that trimmed up, then what I'll do is I'm going to flip it over, and I'm going to cut whatever size I need. So for instance, if I need to cut a 3.5 inch strip, I'm going to line up again one of my lines on my ruler along the bottom, and then the 3.5 along that cut edge that I just trimmed off. When I cut, I just make sure my rotary cutter is open. I have that part against the ruler, and always cut away from yourself. Notice I don't use the mat. The reason I don't use the mat is that, as you can even see in this mat, I've got some divots in here, so I'm not exactly sure exactly where that size is. So I make sure that I always use my ruler because I know it's consistent and that it's accurate. Once you cut your strip, then you'll take and you're going to, again, turn it over, and you're going to trim off this extra. Again, those little scraps. Flip it over, and then line up one of your lines along the bottom, and then put it on 3.5, which I'm just going to cut some 3.5 inch squares. So once I cut my 3.5, if I need to cut a 2 inch by 3.5, what I'll do is I'll just line up one of my lines along the bottom edge here, line this up on 2, and then cut. And then I've got a 2 by 3.5 inch pieces. If I need to cut more, I'll just continue to cut using the ruler and the width that I need. So now that I've done the fat quarter, what I'm going to do next is I'm going to show you how to cut a width of fabric, or a 44 to 45 inch width of fabric. To cut my regular fabric, my width of fabric, what I'll do is I'll make sure that my salvages are lined up and that my fold is towards me. And then I'm going to trim off this little extra here, this little raw edge, and I'm going to use my longer ruler and I'm going to line up the one along the bottom, and I'm going to trim that excess. I'm going to put that away. And then when you cut your strips, you're going to do it the same way you cut your fat quarters. You're going to take your ruler and you're going to line up the one along the bottom and line it up on the 3 1/2. So I'm going to line it up along my 3 1/2. If it moves a little bit, I'll just kind of make it sure it fits there. So I line that up and cut. Now if you find that it wobbles when you're going, you can just move your hand up and keep going. And one of the things that I like to do is I like to pull this large piece away, just in case I missed a spot like that little one and I have that nick. So I go ahead and pull that away. And then what you'll do is just cut your strips the same way. One more thing I want to show you when you're cutting. Say for instance you need a 10 1/2 inch square, and your fabric, you don't have a 10 1/2 inch ruler. You can always use 2 rulers to do this. So I've got my 6 1/2 inch ruler here, and so I need to cut a 10 1/2. So I'm going to use 2 rulers to cut it. So I've got 6, and I always count it just to make sure that I have the right. So I have 6 1/2, 7 1/2, 8 1/2, 9 1/2, 10 1/2. And then I'll just, again, cut it just like I did before. Pull this away, and then if I need to cut squares, same idea. I'm going to trim off my salvages. Rotate this around, and I have 6 1/2 plus the 4, and I've got my 10 1/2 inch squares. So now that I have this cut, the next thing I'm going to do in the next video is I'm going to show you how to prepare yourself for piecing.